Every textbook says World War II began because Hitler wanted world domination. Every politician claims Vietnam was about stopping communism at the water's edge. Every memorial plaque swears the First World War was started by an assassin's bullet. But what if every one of those stories is just the trailer, 2 minutes of drama hiding a 2-hour heist? Stick around. Seriously, don't go anywhere. In the next few minutes, I'm going to pull back the curtain on 3 wars you probably think you understand, wars etched into our collective memory. But for each one, I'll hand you a declassified memo, a secret clause, or a forgotten cable that completely flips the script on why we actually fought. We're talking about documents that sat gathering dust in forgotten archives, hidden from public view for decades, often deliberately. By the time we're done, you're going to see a chillingly consistent pattern emerge. Leaders manufacturing noble excuses, grand narratives about freedom, democracy, or stopping tyranny to cleverly mask raw, unadulterated grabs for money, for markets, for resources, and perhaps most cynically, for their own political survival. Ready to the fine print, the stuff they hoped you'd never find. Because trust me, the real story is always in the fine print. The official line, the one most of us grew up with, paints a picture of stark moral clarity. Hitler invades Poland, an act of unprovoked aggression, and the Allies, noble defenders of liberty, declare war to protect democracy from the rising tide of fascism. We've all seen the grainy newsreels, Churchill's defiant finest hour speeches, Roosevelt championing America as the arsenal of democracy. It feels so clean, so moral, so utterly inevitable, doesn't it? Straightforward battle of good versus evil, a righteous crusade. But that pristine narrative, it's got some serious cracks. Here's where the marble starts to fracture. What if I told you that? In 1939, when Germany unleashed its blitzkrieg, the Nazi regime wasn't just ideologically driven, but also teetering on the brink of economic collapse. It's true, the 4-year rearmament binge. Furious buildup of tanks, planes, and warships had absolutely emptied the national vaults. Germany was effectively broke. Unemployment, a beast Hitler had seemingly tamed, would have soared again. Without a constant influx of fresh loot, new resources, and captured territory to exploit, this wasn't just a hypothesis. It was an acknowledged crisis within the highest echelons of the regime. Enter the secret minutes of the German War Economy meeting, held in August 1939, just weeks before the invasion of Poland. These documents, declassified in '89, reveal a stark, desperate reality. One line in particular practically leaps off the page. If we do not obtain large-scale raw materials by spring 1940, the Reich cannot avoid domestic collapse. Think about that. Translation, invade or bust. The choice wasn't about pure ideology anymore. It was about sheer survival for a regime that had promised prosperity through rearmament. War wasn't just a political aspiration, it was an economic necessity, a desperate gamble to keep the lights on and the population from revolt. Historians like Adam Tooze have meticulously detailed how this economic desperation, rather than solely a grand ideological plan for world conquest, pushed Nazi Germany into aggressive expansion. It was a smash-and-grab policy, timed by economic necessity. So with their backs against the economic wall, the Nazis cut a profoundly cynical deal. 1 week before their tanks rolled into Poland, Joachim von Ribbentrop, Hitler's foreign minister, landed in Moscow. His mission to sign the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact with Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov. Publicly, it was presented as a non-aggression treaty, a shocking alliance between two ideological Archenemies, but privately, and this is where the truth gets ugly. Pages 3 and 4 of the agreement, captured by Allied forces in 45, contained a secret protocol. This protocol wasn't about peace, it was about carving Eastern Europe into slices. Poland was to be brutally chopped in half, Finland and the Baltic states handed over to Stalin, and Western Poland left for Berlin. Both dictators, one fascist, the other a communist, got what they desperately needed: resources, strategic ports, and crucial breathing space. Ideology, it turns out, takes a very distant back seat when land and loot are on the table. This pact, a masterpiece of cynical realpolitik, allowed Hitler to invade Poland without fear of a two-front war, fundamentally altering the geopolitical landscape and shocking the world. Still think America rushed in to save freedom the moment Hitler marched? Not quite. The US remained staunchly isolationist, a sentiment deeply rooted in the trauma of World War I and the Great Depression. Polls from as late as 1940 show a staggering 88% of Americans wanting no part in Europe's war. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, despite his personal convictions, faced immense domestic pressure to stay out. His own cabinet diaries, finally opened in 75, reveal him actively hunting for an incident, any incident, to galvanize the public and shift opinion. He knew the American people weren't ready to fight for abstract European principles. They needed a direct threat. The surprise attack finally arrived on December 7, 1941, at Pearl Harbor. Suddenly, the narrative shifted overnight. War was declared, factories started humming, and the arsenal of democracy sprang into action. Democracy won, sure, but the entry ticket wasn't pure, unadulterated principle. It was a tragic, strategically exploited act of opportunism. The political will for intervention only materialized after a direct attack, not before. Fast forward 20 years, and the official story takes on a different hue, but with a familiar ring. The narrative around the Vietnam War was clear. If Vietnam falls to communism, the rest of Southeast Asia will topple like dominoes. Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, Malaysia, all would follow, threatening the entire free world. Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, they all repeated the same talking point, the domino theory, over and over, hammering it into the public consciousness. It was presented as a vital stand against an existential communist threat, a necessary sacrifice to protect liberty across a vulnerable continent. Yet here's the quiet truth that completely undermines that grand pronouncement. In March 1965, Assistant Secretary of Defense John McNaughton drafted an internal memo. This document, later released as part of the explosive Pentagon Papers, ranked the actual U.S. war aims. And guess what? The domino theory barely registered. Number 1, accounting for a whopping 70% of the motivation: to avoid a humiliating U.S. defeat, not to save Vietnam, but to save face. Number 2, a distant 20%, to keep South Vietnam territory from falling into Chinese hands. Again, about strategic positioning, not Vietnamese freedom. And number 3, a paltry 10% and barely mentioned, to help the people of South Vietnam enjoy a better, freer way of life. The domino theory, it was a footnote, a convenient public relations slogan, not the driving force behind the most devastating war of its era. The real motive was about projecting American power and avoiding the political embarrassment of retreat. So if it wasn't about saving face and barely about saving the Vietnamese people, then why stay? Follow the money, or more accurately, follow the rubber, the tin, and the offshore oil. A 1966 CIA country report, declassified in '73, offers a much more pragmatic and far less noble explanation. It estimated that South Vietnam's coastal shelf alone could hold up to 10 billion barrels of recoverable crude. That's a staggering amount of oil, a prize worth fighting for in the eyes of resource-hungry nations. The same cable, written by intelligence analysts, also noted that losing Saigon would hand Hanoi control of strategic shipping lanes through the South China Sea, a vital artery for global trade and military projection. The memo ends with a chillingly blunt assessment, unfavorable to U.S. balance of payments. Not quite protecting liberty or stopping dominoes, is it? It was about strategic resources and economic control, plain and simple. And then there's the Gulf of Tonkin incident, the supposed casus belli, the unprovoked attack that justified Congress's blank check for war. We were told of two separate attacks on U.S. destroyers by North Vietnamese torpedo boats in August 1964. The second attack, in particular, was presented as undeniable proof of North Vietnamese aggression, prompting swift and decisive retaliation. But in 2005, the NSA quietly released its own internal history, and on page 139, the truth was laid bare. The second attack on 4 August almost certainly did not occur. It was, at best, a misunderstanding, at worst, an outright fabrication. Yet, based on this manufactured incident, Congress passed the Tonkin Resolution with overwhelming support, 504 votes to a mere 2. The rest, as they say, is history. Years of brutal fighting, millions dead, and 58,000 American names etched in black granite, all for what was essentially politics masquerading as patriotism, built on a lie.
World War I, the shot heard round the world, or banker's waltz. Let's rewind further, back to the war to end all wars. The textbook version is concise and dramatic. Gavrilo Princip, a Serbian nationalist, shoots Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo. Alliances, brittle and tightly wound, snap like rubber bands. Millions march to war, convinced they are fighting for a noble cause, for national honor, for a war to end all wars. It's a tragedy of cascading commitments, a domino effect of treaties. But is that the whole story? Or is it just the convenient narrative they wanted us to believe? Let's peer into Britain's Secret Committee of Imperial Defense minutes from July 1911, unsealed almost half a century later in '67. Here, you find a very different kind of anxiety. The committee wasn't primarily worried about Serbian independence or Austrian honor. Their grave concern was Germany's burgeoning naval law, specifically its implications for maritime power. They warned it would undermine London's credit supremacy. Translation: the City of London's banking dominance, its global financial power, was under threat from a rising German rival. That, not Belgian neutrality, was what truly kept British ministers awake at night. It was a struggle for financial hegemony. 1 year later, the same committee wasn't reacting to an assassination. They were proactively plotting troop landings in France under the pretext of protecting the Channel. The trigger for war hadn't even happened yet. The plan was already on the shelf, waiting for an opportune moment to be deployed. The stage was set, not by a single bullet, but by years of economic and imperial rivalry. Across the Atlantic, America was officially neutral. But neutrality, it turns out, can be a very profitable business for some. J.P. Morgan and Company, the titan of Wall Street, funneled an astonishing $500 million in loans to the Entente powers by 1915. That's about 25% of Britain's entire war spending. President Woodrow Wilson's proclamation of neutrality, a seemingly lofty moral stance, sat precariously atop a Treasury memo explicitly stating U.S. banks, cannot absorb default on such scale. Translation: if the Allies lost, Wall Street would sink. The American financial elite had a massive vested interest in an Allied victory. Ever wonder why the sinking of the Lusitania, a British passenger liner carrying American passengers, whipped up such a frenzy of war fever in the U.S.? It was presented as an act of barbarism, an unprovoked attack on civilians. But Morgan's counsel had sent a cable days earlier, urging for a psychological incident to unite public opinion and push America towards intervention. When the ship went down, taking 128 Americans with it, headlines screamed, public outrage surged, and those massive loans to the Allies suddenly looked a lot safer. Was it a coincidence? Or a tragically convenient incident that served a very specific financial agenda? Even the armistice, the supposed end of all hostilities, carried hidden math. Article 19 of the Treaty of Versailles, a clause rarely taught in schools, laid out Germany's reparations. It required Germany to pay not just money, but in gold, ships, coal, and securities. Translation: it wasn't just about punishing Germany, it was about systematically stripping a major industrial competitor of its capital, its infrastructure, and its resources, and handing them directly to the victors. The war to end all wars ended with a peace treaty designed to ensure economic dominance for the victors, crippling Germany for decades. Ideals were the pretty wrapping paper. Finance, power, and resources were the gift inside. So, have you noticed the chillingly consistent recipe? It's a playbook honed over centuries, perfected with each new conflict. Step 1. Pick an emotional trigger. It's got to be something visceral, something that bypasses rational thought and goes straight for the gut. Think Pearl Harbor, a sudden, devastating sneak attack on home soil. Think the Gulf of Tonkin, an unprovoked act of aggression against American ships. Think the Lusitania, innocent civilians drowned by a ruthless enemy. These aren't just events, they're carefully selected moments, often exaggerated or even fabricated, designed to ignite public outrage and a thirst for retaliation. They create a moral imperative where none might actually exist. Step 2. Wrap it in moral language. Once the emotional trigger is set, you cloak the true intentions in a shimmering veil of high-minded rhetoric. It's always about freedom, democracy, stopping tyranny, protecting our way of life, or even, as in World War I, a war to end all wars. The Vietnam War wasn't about oil, it was about stopping dominoes from falling. World War II wasn't about Germany's economic desperation, it was freedom versus fascism. This moral framing is crucial because it makes the immense human and financial cost of war palatable, even noble, to the average citizen. It transforms self-interest into self-sacrifice. Step 3. Bury the economic or geopolitical clause in classified annexes. This is where the real motives live, far from public scrutiny. The secret protocols of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, the internal memos ranking U.S. war aims in Vietnam, the British Committee of Imperial Defense Minutes discussing credit supremacy, these are the documents that lay bare the true calculations. They're locked away, marked top secret, often for decades, because their immediate release would expose the cynical pragmatism behind the lofty public pronouncements. They reveal the fine print that contradicts the trailer. Step 4. When these documents inevitably leak or are declassified decades later, bet on public amnesia. By the time the truth finally surfaces, usually long after the war is over, the veterans have passed, the politicians who made the decisions are gone, and the myth has calcified into marble and bronze. The official narrative has been taught in schools, enshrined in memorials, and celebrated in popular culture. The average person confronted with a dusty declassified memo is unlikely to question the grand, heroic story they've known their whole lives. The public has moved on, and the institutions that benefited from the war are still thriving. So, with all this evidence, these declassified memos, these secret minutes, why isn't this the history we were taught? Why does it feel like you're only hearing this now? The answer lies in the painfully slow dance of declassification cycles. Governments, for reasons they claim are national security, often keep documents under wraps for 30, 50, even 70 years. Think about that time frame. That's long after the textbooks are printed, long after the memorials are cast in stone, long after the generations who fought and died have passed on. By the time the truth finally trickles out, often in obscure government archives or academic journals, the myth has already calcified into an unassailable truth. It's become part of the national identity, woven into the fabric of our understanding. Anyone questioning it then, even with undeniable documentary evidence, risks sounding unpatriotic, revisionist, or even worse, like a conspiracy theorist. The official story is too ingrained, too emotionally resonant, too sacred to challenge. Meanwhile, the same banks, the same shipyards, the same oil majors, the same industrial complexes that bankrolled and profited from those wars? They've had decades to collect compound interest, to entrench their power, and to ensure their version of history remains the dominant one. The beneficiaries of war have every incentive to keep the real reasons buried deep. The cost of these convenient fictions isn't just intellectual. It's paid in blood and treasure, generation after generation. Consider World War II, a staggering 70 million dead, half of them civilians, innocent lives caught in a geopolitical chess game driven by economic desperation and territorial ambition. Vietnam, over 3 million Vietnamese lives lost, both military and civilian, alongside 58,000 American soldiers, their names etched in black granite, all for a war primarily aimed at avoiding humiliating defeat and securing strategic resources. World War I, 20 million military and civilian casualties, a generation decimated, fueled by imperial rivalries and financial anxieties masquerading as national honor. These aren't just statistics. Their entire populations wiped out, families shattered, futures extinguished. And the financial tally? Adjust for inflation, and those 3 wars alone exceed a mind-boggling $15 trillion. Let that sink in. $15 trillion. That's enough to fund universal health care for every single nation involved for decades. Enough to eradicate global poverty, to invest in sustainable energy, to solve some of humanity's most pressing problems. But that opportunity cost, the cost of what could have been, never appears on a recruitment poster. It's the silent, invisible toll of believing the lie. This isn't just about history, it's about the present and the future. Because the playbook hasn't changed. The patterns are still there if you know where to look. So, next time politicians beat the drum of war, next time the cable news anchors echo their talking points, don't just nod along. Ask for the memo. Demand the internal documents. Before the first flag-draped coffin comes home, demand the intelligence assessment in full, not the carefully curated, one-paragraph press release designed to generate consent. When cable news flashes an atrocity story designed to inflame your emotions and rally you to a cause, take a breath. Then, check who owns the adjacent mineral rights, who stands to gain financially, who holds the debt. Follow the money. Follow the resources. It's history's most reliable rule of thumb. If the stated reason for war were truly noble, truly pure, truly about protecting freedom or stopping tyranny, they wouldn't need classification stamps. They wouldn't need secret clauses. They wouldn't need to lie. They'd be shouting the reasons from the rooftops, because the truth would be its own justification. If this kind of hidden history, this unvarnished truth, flips your switch, if it makes you want to dig deeper, then hit that subscribe button. I'm dropping new videos every single week, peeling back the layers, digging through declassified files so you don't have to. And hey, tell me in the comments which war you want untangled next. Let's keep questioning, together. They say truth is the first casualty of war. But that's not quite right. Actually, truth is the first draft, raw, messy, inconvenient. Then it's redacted, rewritten, polished, and finally dumped in a vault, often until the veterans die off, until the witnesses are gone, until the public has forgotten. We just fished 3 of those drafts out of the trash. We've seen the real reasons, buried deep beneath layers of propaganda and patriotic fervor. If the official stories were truly right, if these wars were truly fought for the reasons they claimed, the receipts wouldn't be marked top secret. They'd be proudly displayed. So keep the receipts. Keep questioning everything. And next time someone claims a war is about freedom or democracy or stopping tyranny, hand them the folder of declassified documents. Watch the story change. Watch the truth emerge.